Welcome to the Independent Artist Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, glassblower. Join our conversations with professional working artists.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. It has been a couple of weeks since Douglas and I have recorded together, but it's nice to be able to record during Pride Month. So I just wanted to jump on here and wish everybody who's celebrating and everybody who's supportive a happy Pride Month to our LGBTQ plus community.
Absolutely. Yeah, I second that big time. So that's great.
Yeah, it's always been a safe place to me as far as art shows go, and definitely an ally as far as the community and the community at large. Always been proud that we've been able to be that way.
Yeah. And I mean, aren't we really all part of the community anyway? I mean, in the sense that if not ourselves, people we love, people we care about, you know, it's a time to be proud and to allow people to be who they are and to embrace it and celebrate it. So happy Pride, everyone.
So, what else is going on, man? We've had a couple of shows under our belt since the last time we talked.
We have been running a race here, haven't we? It's been quite crazy. I will say that a couple of conversations I've had recently out on the road that a lot of us artists are going through some shit. So I just want to, send out a big virtual hug to everyone who's just making it through, everyone. So,
Don't touch me, Douglas. Get out of here. I want to be touched. I don't like that. Heads up. I think Reiko accidentally tricked me into agreeing to record a podcast every week now. So get to work.
Oh, did she?
Apparently, she tricked. She wants it every week, and she talked in circles there and got me to agree to it. So. That's not happening. That's not going to happen.
No, that can't happen.
Honestly, I'm barely able to hang on with the every 2-week schedule. I love the show, so don't get me wrong, but I'm definitely hitting the stride of show fatigue, if you will, or maybe panic. Panic.
Definitely
panic,
show
arting.
panic. I mean, for me, it's like I just can't even keep up with what I've committed myself to. I feel bad that I have to give a last minute cancellation, which I had to do this week for Des Moines. But then I also feel bad for the collectors that I've been getting some messages online. I've left a letting people know kind of thing so I don't have collectors come looking for us and we're not there. And I've had a few responses almost like they're my mom making me feel guilty for not being able to be there. And I already feel bad,
Right. Yeah, I get it. I've got one on the hook. I'm not doing Des Moines this year either, unfortunately. And I always love that show, and it's hard not to do it.
Me too.
I am on the hook, honestly. I got an Instagram message. I'm on the hook for my possible best Des Moines ever.
Oh, really?
And I'm not even going to be there. So
really?
We'll see how keep your fingers crossed on that one.
Somebody from Des Moines is toying with you a little bit or presenting an offer for a commission or something?
A little. They're flirting. Yeah, flirting? We're in the flirting stage. We'll see if I can close it. I think I can take them home with me.
Awesome. That's excellent. Hey, so last episode you talked to David Mayhew. And when we had our chance to talk, it was actually before his episode was recorded. So I wanted to share a story I had about getting stuck in a storm on my way.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about, going out to Cherry Creek and how you were getting calls like, pull off, man, pull up, pull over to the side.
Right.
Well, for me, I was coming home from Oklahoma City one year from doing that show. And I wanted to get a couple of hours in on the road before I stopped for the night. But I drove right into a frickin' tornado right around the border. And it was dark, so I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew that I was having trouble with steering and I was blowing back and forth and the rain was coming down pretty heavy. So I pulled off at
steering is important. We like that. That's a nice option. It's a feature.
It's a feature,
right?
Yeah. So I pull off the road. I stop at a gas station and I see people running in panicked. So they obviously knew something I didn't know. And this was before we had weather apps on our phones. I think I had one of those old flip phones where, if you're going to text, you have to hit the button 5 times to get to the right letter you need.
3 letters per key.
Yeah, exactly. So I get in, and right as I get into the gas station, an attendant locks the door behind me. I'm like, whoa, they're like tornado coming.
Did he think the lock was going to help?
No, they
like just lock. Stay out, tornado. You're not invited.
I think it has more to do with like crime. You know, they wanted to lock us all in and keep anyone out because shit was coming across the highway.
Right.
They told us all to walk into their walk-in freezer. So me and about 20 other people are huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, in this dark walk-in freezer.
No lights.
It was like crazy. So they're asking, I'm thinking, Renee's not going to...
And it's like 15 degrees or whatever. It's a deep freeze, right?
Nutty. So I'm thinking, Renee has no idea where I am.
Wait, was Renee with you?
No, I was home by myself. She was home with the kids, and the kids were little. This, like I said, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So here I am on my phone with a little light on my phone trying to text her where I'm at and blah, blah, blah. Storm came and went. I was okay. But for a good 25 minutes, it was a little hairy, and I didn't know what the heck was going to happen.
And I'm sure you're driving, it's Oklahoma City. That's in the, late spring.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you're probably wearing shorts or a T-shirt or something like that,
I don't even remember any of that. I just remember being panicked that I was going to die and nobody would know where I was.
Amazing. I got one for you. We were driving. It was similar. I might have actually been coming home from OKC.
Okay.
But I'm coming home and it's, it's tornado season and I'm driving across and, I love the Mississippi River and I'm crossing the Mississippi and I'm looking behind me though. And I'm like, good God, that storm behind me, it's like that Coke bottle green, with the inky clouds. And I'm like, whoa, all right, let me pull over. So I pulled over at the first stop and it was the Mississippi rest station.
Okay.
And I stopped in and, it's a big old brick building and sure it's got a bunch of glass, but it's got places to shelter. And I'm like, okay, this seems like a safe spot. And, it's close to 5:00.
Mm.
And well, Douglas, that's when the Mississippi rest station closes for the day.
Yeah.
Or the welcome center. That's,
you were not welcome at 5:00.
Yeah. I was not welcome. We're like, and it was just some pimply kid, and he's like, sorry, we're closing, man. We got to get, we close. And I'm like, you're going to kick us all out into that storm. And we're all like, it's a pretty nice welcome center. And we're all standing around watching the TVs. And of course, they've interrupted it to show all of the tornadoes in the area.
Uh-huh.
And it's right freaking there. And he's like, he just boots us all out. And I was like, no, I'm not. We're not leaving, dude. Yeah. We're not gonna. That's not safe. So he just didn't, and he was like, I could call the police. I'm like, I think they got us there on that side. I think they might be on our side. Maybe I'll call them, and that'll be. I could say, hey, this guy.
They'll come check it out after the storm is over, and we're all good, right?
Oh yeah, when the trees look like chewed food, and like you ever run over a sapling with your lawnmower?
Yes.
That's kind of what the trees look like after the big storm. So,
yeah, it's pretty crazy the running into those storms and just hearing hearing the experiences that David goes through and everything like that. So I enjoyed that talk. I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so here's an interesting story. We just came from Milwaukee, and Milwaukee is one of I have really fond memories. It's a really important show to me. For one, it's our home state. It's where we live. But for two, a number of years ago, we met some collectors. And, sometimes we don't always know who's out in the crowd and who could really impact changes in our career, that sort of thing, you know? Yeah. And so in 2008, we met a couple who, very wealthy man, biophysicist, did research for MRIs and all that kind of stuff. So he sold these patents and blah, blah, blah. So they wanted to start a glass collection for Wisconsin, the Museum of Wisconsin Art, because the contemporary glass movement started in Madison and in the state of Wisconsin. And so they wanted to build a substantial collection here in West Bend, north of Milwaukee.
Sure. Yeah. I know a perfect place to start.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So anyway, he bought a piece from us that started the collection, which was a huge honor and all that kind of stuff. So we did this installation, which I've talked about on the show before. And the thing that's strange about it is people think it's a Chihuly. And it was made by us. It doesn't look like anything Chihuly's ever done, but because it's hanging glass, people just think it's a Chihuly.
That's the benchmark, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that's people's like standard point of reference for glass.
Exactly.
Is Chihuly, right? I mean, he's the most famous. His studio is the most famous. So
Totally.
Got it.
So this lady and her daughter walks in our booth, and they see one of our sculptures that is very reminiscent of this installation that we have. And they looked at it, and the one woman said, "Oh, look, that's the Chihuly." She mispronounced it, of course. That's the Chihuly that's at the Museum of Wisconsin Art. And I said to her, "Oh, are you talking about West Bend?" And she said, "Yeah, oh, I love that piece from Chihuly." I said, "Well, that wasn't made by Chihuly." And she said, "Well, how do you know?" I said, "Because we made it."
Right. Yeah, that lady right there, and I did that. We did that.
Yeah.
So it's not, and it's Cholula, a little hot sauce.
So we had a few of those moments because it's so close to Milwaukee that it's recognizable. So that was kind of interesting talking to people about it.
It is. I always think it's weird when people come by and they see you. I've got a gallery that represents me in Chicago, and they'll see me at Old Town, and they'll be like, and their immediate go-to is that I'm ripping off the artist that is, that they saw in the gallery. I'm like, no, that's me. Like
Isn't that funny? They never even consider that they're meeting the artist of the work that the first go-to is that it's a ripoff.
Right. You're an outdoor artist, and this was indoors. This was fancy, and you're not fancy.
No,
you're bad.
No, this is...
Yeah, it's funny which way, the direction that folks go to. I think that's their first instinct anyway.
Yeah. So, hey, I feel like I need to bring something up, Will. I feel like, you have been such an incredible sport for the last few years that we've been doing this, because I recognize that being a glass blower, there are plenty of words we use that have like this kind of like double meaning. And it's just such a natural thing for me to say. And you have never, you've given me the look like, oh, come on, Douglas. So like when I say I'm going to go out and blow, you give me that look like,
well, I honestly, I don't like repetition, and I feel like it's such an easy, low-hanging fruit. But I will admit to the fact that, like, my wife will ask me, "Are you recording?" And I'll just say, "No, Douglas is blowing," and then she'll just then we have a laugh about it. But it's not. I imagine that, like Gregory Story's balls. And your constant blowing, it's just such low-hanging fruit that I can't imagine that's something that you're not just sick to freaking death of.
I try not to actually use the name of the reheating chamber in our studio that is called a glory hole, just because of that same reason. People look at us and go, "The what? What did you just call that thing?"
I see. Yeah. Hey, this is an interesting story. Years and years ago, and friends of yes, I have a glory hole segue.
Okay,
ladies
here we
and
go.
Gentlemen.
Speaking of glory holes,
speaking of low hanging fruit, we've got. Years and years ago, I was honored enough to have been invited to go to Chris Bruno's wedding, and it was in a state park, and in the state park, and everybody's getting, people were getting changed and whatnot in the restroom. I was like, that's the first time I've seen a real live glory hole. Looked like a squirrel gnawed through the wall, but I was like, well, that's not anything I want to put anything in. That's not
anything you want back anyway.
That's a leap of faith.
That is,
isn't that something? Anyway, you're right. There are so many moments in this podcast where I get into my that's what she said, and I don't hit it. But thank you for acknowledging me, because it's hard.
It's a temptation. It's a low hanging fruit, as you said, and you are very intellectual in your humor.
Oh yeah, definitely. I keep it super highbrow. Everybody knows that. Man, that's hilarious. Well, you know what? Speaking of hilarious and good conversation, I always enjoy talking to you, sir, but I think it's time to let the folks hear the Zachmans. We've got Jeff and CJ Zachmann here on the show this week, and couldn't be more happy to sit down and get the ins and outs of a father-son relationship that are on the road. It's pretty fascinating to hear the friendship that those two guys have.
I probably don't even need to say this up front, but listen for those moments where they finish each other's sentences, or they try and jump to the punchline. So it's kind of a little competitive. Who wants to be the one to finish the story? Yeah. So not only was this just like to hear their experiences, but it was so fun to see their relationship through what they didn't say or how they acted, you know?
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. Really fun show.
All right, here we go. Hope y'all enjoy the talk.
This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap, the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
Well, sometimes I'm in a real hurry, and I just love that I have things that are saved in Zap to streamline my process.
To that end, Douglas, one of my tricks with Zap is to favorite all of the shows that I'm even remotely considering. That way I can filter them all and then look at all the deadlines at once.
But then there's other times when I have a little more time on my hands and I'm looking into other shows and I want to get to know about the show, and all the information is right there in the prospectus with links to the website. I can see who the artists are that have participated in the past.
You know, that's a great idea, Douglas, because one of the ways that I was finding shows at the very beginning was to go online and see who I felt my work looked good with.
It's just great that all that information is organized and easy to look over when planning our next show season. All right, thanks, you guys. Here I am. I'm with the Zachmans. I'm with Father Jeff Zachmann and his son Carl Zachmann, straight out of Fergus Falls, Minnesota, both kinetic sculpture artists. Thanks, you guys, for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Look at that in stereo, the two of you.
This is probably going to be a challenge for you to edit with two people coming at you.
I haven't had a three-way conversation in a while. My first one that I did was our first season with Mickey Cunningham and her daughter, Reiko.
Oh, that's right.
Reiko Yucatel. And Mickey had the absolute worst Wi-Fi connection of all time, and she kept getting kicked off of the call. So I had to piece together all these sections to make it into a coherent conversation. So anyway, how are you guys doing? What have you been up to these days?
Oh, we're kind of gearing up for Cherry Creek right now. Just trying to Cherry Creek in the fall. Beyond that, I've got a heavy season coming up.
I got a bit of a lighter season. I had a really heavy spring. I ended up going from Fort Worth to Jazz Fest to Reston with a week in between every single trip. So
those are biggies.
Yeah, they were.
I typically see you at the same events, but do you always travel together, go to the same shows, or do you have completely separate schedules?
We have separate schedules, but we end up overlapping a lot just because there are only so many of the A-list shows that we both want to do. When we're both in, then it cuts our expenses because we can usually all fit in one vehicle, take a trailer if need be, and share hotels. And it's always nice to have somebody to drive with. Otherwise, we end up driving by ourselves, and that gets boring.
It really does.
So it isn't like you rely on having the same schedule. If one of you gets into a show, it's not like you guys say, if we're not both in it, we're not doing it.
Right.
You're very independent on your own kind of career path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this year, he got into Fort Worth, and I decided I'm not going to do that show again until they change their policy and let me in.
Yeah. That's it.
Every once in a while, we get juried out, right? And
right.
I think you've had quite the run there, Jeff, at Fort Worth.
Yeah. Last year
it really has.
Absolute over-the-top record show for me. And this year I didn't get in. It was like, That's
the way this business works, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
Wow.
I am in more often than not. I get in more than my share, so I'm not going to grumble about it.
Well, Carl, you've been working on a project you were telling me about. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah. So in my off time with my influences and all the historic type of stuff I put in my art, I spend a lot of time at steam threshing shows and things like that, where they're running old construction equipment and vintage steam engines and stuff. And a family reached out to me a couple years ago and wanted a scale model working water tender wagon to go behind their scale model steam engine, about half scale. So I've spent 2 years in planning and sourcing, and last year I built the thing, and now I am with the gap between shows, able to work in the wood finishing and all the powder coating and lettering and graphics and everything. So,
wow. And is it like to scale sort of thing, or is it?
Yeah. Yep. It's fully working. I found originals out in South Dakota that I measured and photographed and documented. One of the gentlemen that I help with, he has, I think, 12 working steam engines and 6 water wagons. And
wow.
His son reconstructed the largest working steam engine tractor ever made, resurrected it. So I was able to go out to the family, and they let me take measurements and carte blanche of everything, and documented other ones I found around it, and vintage catalogs, and have recreated everything to about 95% accurate. I didn't put in the like 600 rivets in the water tank.
Okay.
I opted for one made out of a Freightliner diesel tank that I cut up and remanufactured.
Okay. And this is all from your own design. I mean, this isn't like a refurbishing of something. This is you creating it from
Nope, from scratch. Totally from scratch, because it's a working model.
Wow.
So it's 61% of full, and the size is based off the size of the tank I had and the wheels that I got and salvaged. And then just to prove I could, I decided to make the cast iron water pump that goes on it from scratch built from all the parts, pretty much laying around the studio. I just had all the materials and recut up stuff and welded it all together. And I became part owner of a small foundry setup a couple years ago. So I'll be casting all the brass ends with the logo in it and everything. So
how did this project come to you?
The family just reached out and said, "Hey, you're a welder. You do metal work. You've helped operate this engine at the shows and things like that. And we need this water wagon, this tender to go behind it. The scale models burn through water a lot faster than the bigger ones. So when you're in a parade and stuff, you need to have the extra water and the extra wood. So cool. They just wanted a working wagon that was close, but I jumped all in because I could. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting when those kinds of things come our way. I mean, a lot of times we get them from the shows. You know, people have these very unique projects that they present us with. I mean, Jeff, you've had that experience with all your years on the road, right?
Yeah.
Talk about some of your projects that you've done.
But then on the other side, you do get, like, I was in Portland one time, and a guy came up and say, "You're just the guy I'm looking for." Okay. I invented a left-handed back scratcher because all the back scratchers are right-handed. You're the guy that could make them for me. And then you have to find somehow to get out of that conversation and find something to do on the other side of the booth. So you get all kinds of that stuff.
Believe me, I have plenty of folks who are bringing their light fixture pennants at the art show, walking in the booth asking if we could somehow make them a replacement, you know, like we're Home Depot or something like that, or a lighting store. And we're like, next. Moving on.
Right. And I'm willing to pay up to $25 for that.
My God, that is a tempting offer.
Yeah. The project that had the longest recap for custom was that 22-foot piece we did for that Las Vegas candy store. Oh, they needed this giant gumball machine for the entrance, and Vegas is the second hardest city to build in after New York. Okay. Because of the regulations. You only can have so many percentage of your facade can be plastic. So they couldn't make the globe of the gumball machine in plastic. So this architect remembered seeing Dad at Fort Worth years before, and he went through all of his cell phone photos until he found the business card.
Wow. So that was a custom thing because typically your pieces are flat. You're the kinetic sculptor who does the balls that go through the maze up and down, but it's vertical. This was more in a spherical shape, 3-dimensional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
And it also had a lot of problems in that it was outdoors in Las Vegas.
Yeah. It was a collaboration too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I usually do pretty thin solid gears, but for this I ended up doing 4 foot, 6 inches deep, hollow tins that all spun and hydraulics and everything.
Cool.
Yeah,
wow,
it was a real mind-bending project, and because the permitting kept getting delayed, but the deadline didn't, we actually ended up building this massive sculpture in just month and a half, something like that.
Really,
we just lived
that's pretty
it,
fast.
and it was Well, it was really frustrating. It's really fun to look back on it.
Oh, I had a blast
that we did this. Yeah,
I had a blast. It wasn't that frustrating. But the weird thing is that they would come up. We'd think and be like, "Well, we can't do this. We don't know how we're going to make it work." And just as we were going to back out, we would go, "Hey, we can do this." Like the hydraulics for making it run slow and being, sealed from dirt and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the next day they would be like, well, we need to know this specific. And it was the one we had figured out the day before. That happened like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Carl, it really seems like from getting to know you that you're that problem solver. You're that kind of the engineer, like you can solve those problems and you make those things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I do.
Carl is a really good engineer. I'm a pretty good engineer, but Carl's a really good engineer. And I don't think he even realizes how good of an engineer he is. He doesn't have the engineering background. I mean, he went to school for a little while for engineering and then went off into other things, but he just thinks that way.
Archaeology.
Yeah.
Art and archaeology. Okay.
Yep. I have a master's degree that influences my art.
Well, Jeff, I know from watching something that you had, a video that you have online, you were talking about how you can change and adapt your sculptures, either from the engineer point of view, where you can measure the velocity of the drop and the slope and the this and the that for the distance of the ball, or you can just do the trial and error thing and you can move you can move the basket to where it needs to be.
I didn't realize that one was online, but it's usually a line I give customers. I get the same few questions over and over again. One of the questions I get all the time is, a lot of times my sculptures will have a jump in it. And people are like, how in the world do you get to go in that same spot all the time? So the line that I give them, and I don't do it all the time, it just depends on the right person, because I want to make sure they're having a good time and I'm not like making fun of them or something like that.
Right.
But I'll tell them, well, there's 2 ways to do it. One way is you can figure out the mass of the ball, the slope of the track, the distance of the track, that matters the speed of the track, and then graphing all those together, it can tell you the trajectory on where it's going to be, and then, figure it out that way. Or you can just make the jump, roll the ball down, wherever it lands, it goes in, make the basket. And that's what I do.
And you make adjustments and modifications.
And then I do it that way. And then, and I probably get that question. I better get it 50 times a day when I'm at.
Wow.
I get, like I said, I get the same questions over and over. The question I get the most, and it's funny because it's the question most artists hate. How long does it take you to make these?
Right.
And I'll tell you, they aren't asking.
See Doug rolling his eyes.
They're not asking what you think they're asking.
Oh, they're not asking to do our hourly wage. They're not trying to calculate that.
No, not at all. And I mean, I literally will get this questions, and this is no kidding, 100 times a day.
Okay.
People will ask me that. And the first couple of years, I was being coy with it and things like that. And then I thought, what the hell? So I tell them, it's anything from a few days to a few weeks to get these done. And I get 2 answers for that. One of them is that quick. And the other one is, I can imagine. Because they're focusing on one end or the other. And they're actually trying to build that story about you in their head to make you even better. So when they figure out I'm doing it really fast, they're not saying, he's ripping me off. They're thinking, he's really good.
That's an interesting take I've never even considered.
Yeah, it's about, the faster you do your craft, the better you get at it. And the better you get, the faster you get. Practice makes perfect.
True. Well, glass blowers are notorious. They'll say, how long did it take to make that piece? An hour. And they're like, an hour? And they look at you like you said, you're ripping them off, or at least that's my interpretation of ripping them off. But, standing an hour to an hour and a half in front of those hot ovens, you can't set it down. You can't answer the phone. It's not like painting where you're building up layers over time. Right. It's a totally different beast, a different animal. And if they don't understand your medium, it does kind of feel like you have to give it took me 30 years to get to this point. And
that's what I was going to say. It doesn't include the years of perfecting the craft. I mean, I've seen your work, Doug. It's gorgeous. I've also seen my dad's college glass work. It's not.
You did glass work, Jeff.
Oh, not very long. I went to Moorhead State University in Minnesota here, and the ceramics professor set up a glass studio.
Okay.
And I still think he didn't really know what he was doing because it was rough and nobody was turning out anything.
Rustic is what they say.
So it was like a year of a brand new glass furnace and equipment that we built, and it was
everybody making birds.
Yeah, it was pretty pitiful. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I have to say, Jeff, about your sculptures and the way the balls move through the course and through the tracks, it's like an ADD person's dream come true because they can completely shut out the whole world and just follow the track of what's happening. And it's like everything else just gets filtered away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And he actually had an ADHD pharmaceutical company commission a trade show piece that illustrated that exact point.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
This was, probably 15 years ago. This company called me up and said, we're making this piece for this pharmaceutical. We wanted to demonstrate how the ADD med works. So the top of the sculpture was 12 or 13 feet high. It was pretty big and kind of an hourglass shape. And the top of it was just wild, things going every which way. Chaotic. And the bottom part was just a smooth track that just went round and round and round. And actually, when they asked about it, I said, yeah, I can do that for you. And I was building, I thought, man, the bottom is actually going to look really boring. But when the thing was running with a lot of balls, it worked really
Hypnotic.
Cool. Bottom, just the smooth running just calmed you down from looking at the top that was chaotic. It worked better than I thought it would. It was kind of amazing.
It's interesting how sometimes those commissions or those requests can send us in a direction we would have never thought to go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. By all the time. So like the Vegas piece that Carl was talking about, we had to do so many things out of our comfort zone that we had to figure it out. And it was
structural steel. So the way it was done is because of the globe shape of the sculpture, Dad's tracks were the shape, and I had to mount all the gears in this sphere inside. So it took weeks and months of figuring how to do it and drawing and sketching. And what I ended up coming up with is that we had giant angle iron pillars and then zigzagged it like, old steel work is riveted together, which gave us a support to branch all the supports off of that we needed. And we were originally going to weld the whole thing, but Vegas said we couldn't because we didn't have welding certificates to prove that we were structural welders. So we ended up bolting everything together, and that worked out better in the long run because we could disassemble it for powder coating and reassemble it. And we could, tweak a little piece rather than cutting parts off and rewelding whole components.
Well, Carl, I think about that aspect with you is you are like a problem solver. I mean, part of your artwork is also like, how can I solve that problem?
Yeah. Yep. I love kind of deconstructing things. I still take stuff apart in the studio. I'm perpetually 4. And just to see how things work.
Yeah. I have a son like that too.
Is he 41?
No, he's not 41. Would you like me to adopt you, Carl?
Oh, no.
The more, the merrier.
Come to the studio and see the piles of things taken apart. You might go, wait a minute. Yeah. But it's really nice working with Carl in the studio because we do think a lot alike. Previously, I'd make something, I'd have a new motor mount that it came up with a self-tensioning. I could take home to my wife. Oh, look, I made this new motor mount that self-tensions. And my wife would go, oh, that's nice. But Carl, he looks at it and goes, oh, cool. But maybe if you did this, it might work a little better with that. And it's so cool to be able to bounce ideas off him like that.
We kind of have this David Letterman game of cool or lame. We find that the barrier between cool and lame is like a razor's edge. So you explain something and you have this idea and this spark and you're like, is this cool or is this lame? And sometimes it's right on the edge and you kind of have to make it to figure out.
Well, who's the arbiter of if it's cool or lame? Does it bounce back and forth between the two of you? Or, is there ever...
Usually when the question is asked, we're questioning ourselves. So the other person is kind of the judge.
Or suggests, tweaks to throw it over the fence into cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Carl, you grew up in this business. You went to shows with your dad. This business is like it's in you, not just DNA wise, but actual like nature and nurture. I mean, talk about that experience.
I remember going to Park Point in Duluth and camping overnight because we didn't have hotels. I remember staying in $50 Motel 6s, $40 Motel 6s.
No, Carl. No, there was a long time I wouldn't pay $50 for a hotel.
Yeah, that's right. And Land of the Loon. I think how old was I when I almost got killed by a bus in Uptown?
Oh, yeah, you were probably about 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you guys on Hennepin and it rounded the corner?
Yeah, well, actually, it wasn't. He remembers this Uptown. It was actually the Aquatennial show, which, because as a potter, I would take on any show I could get. Okay. And he stepped off the curb, and my booth was on the curb, and a bus just narrowly missed him. It was yeah.
That's scary.
I remember going to, was it Powderhorn Park, and sleeping under the blue tent with the bungee cords,
Yeah, under the tarp.
Because it was all the overstock.
So rustic was your upbringing.
Yep. I was a feral child. I was told, it's like, all right, we're here,
Yeah.
Check back. I didn't have a watch. It's just check back. And, all the artists around, you can spot an art show kid a mile away,
Yeah.
And they're just kind of doing their own thing. And you just know that he belongs to that booth or over there. You don't know his name or maybe even his parents' name. And the weird irony here is that the very first show I did was...
You're saying that you exhibited your workout?
Yep. The very first show I did was Howard Allen in the Kansas City Light and Power District.
Okay.
And just across from me in a couple booths down was a younger artist and his wife, and his son was the quintessential age I remember of 4 to 6 at an art show. Mm. And he was just me. He was, everything he was doing and how he was running around the art show. It was exactly like I remembered growing up.
Mm. Is it a weird experience to see yourself in that? You know what I mean? From a different vantage point, to kind of know what that kid is going through.
It really is. It actually took me into college to realize, maybe started in high school, but definitely cemented in college, just how different my life was.
Yeah.
I grew up as an art carny and not the guy from the Honeymooners. Mm-hmm. In that I got taken out of school a lot to travel. My teachers were very supportive of, as long as I got the homework done, go to DC, go to Florida, go to Phoenix, go to,
There's
wherever.
an aspect of learning that happens on the road that you just can't get in a classroom. So, I mean, it is cool that when schools allow that for their kids, for kids.
And we would hit up museums and things like that while we were out. And was in high school and college, I started realizing just how truly unique my upbringing was.
Our daughter has recently communicated that back to us. She's 26 and she's a master's in psychology. And, she's done a lot of introspection on her life. And she's like, I really didn't realize exactly what you're saying. I really didn't realize in the moment that people didn't experience the kind of upbringing that she did. She expected her friends to kind of have the same reality, but they just didn't.
There's a type of introspection that's needed. And, as growing up, your world is your world. You think everybody's like that. You think everybody thinks like you. Mm. Dad and I thinking alike is something that I've only found 1 or 2 other people than him that has even remotely come close to thinking like me. Mm. And, growing up, I thought everybody did.
Mm-hmm. Was that always a smooth kind of interaction? Or if you guys thought alike, was there butting of heads in those formative years?
Well, the way I think of it is Carl is very opinionated and I'm right. So,
okay.
It's kind of like the Orange County Choppers guys.
Okay.
But our arguments aren't as bad and we don't throw chairs.
Yeah.
So
if you're always right, Jeff, I mean, how does that present itself? I mean, are there...
Usually with him being wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, do you just throw your arms up, Carl, and kind of say, okay, I mean, whatever, I'm not going to win this fight? Or
that's what happened over COVID. I finally learned that.
Okay.
Well, it's working in the same studio. There's kind of lines that I have to try and follow in my head, whether I'm being a dad or a teacher.
Or a know-it-all.
Sometimes, a know-it-all. And sometimes the dad thing gets in the way of the teacher. Sometimes I just have to back off and say, okay, he's doing it his way. Let it go. It's a lesson for me as well, trying to figure out how to do that.
I'm 53, and I'm in that spot in life where, for a number of years, my dad and I have been on this kind of level where we're kind of more peers than father-son. You know what I mean? And my son is in his 20s, and I'm kind of seeing myself kind of shift into that role too. I still feel like I'm the dad, of course, but there does come that leveling off period where, okay, Carl you said you're 41, right? You're an adult. You've had life experiences, and there can be things that you bring to the conversation where you might be right over what maybe your dad might think.
Well, and the thing is it doesn't matter how old I am. I will always be blamed as the son for misplacing the drill bit or not putting the screwdriver away, even though he has gotten progressively older over the years and his memory isn't as sharp. I've noticed that we've switched in who's not putting stuff away. And now here's the kicker. My son, who is 8, and my nephew, who's 5, come and visit, and they just move everything.
And are they as creative as you guys? I mean, are they playing with things, making things out of materials?
They've discovered the miracle of hot glue.
Yeah. We have things hot glued together that you cannot imagine.
Zombie weapons and sculptures and...
So this intergenerational thing, it sounds like it's gonna keep on going for a while. It's not just gonna end with the two of you.
Yeah, Carl's son, James, he's a very creative kid. He lives outside of town, not in town here, about an hour away, so he doesn't get as much studio time. Evander, my daughter's son, she's actually adopted. He's not actually a genetic kid, but he is incredibly talented artistic-wise, too.
Everything.
And he spends a lot of time in the studio. And they're just goofing around, and I was kind of raised that way. My dad was actually a diesel mechanic, and he let us use tools and stuff. And for the life of me, I'm not sure why he did, because he lost a lot of tools over the years just in the backyard somewhere.
Not me. It's
not Carl.
Yeah. But so I try and just let them go. I mean, I keep an eye on them so they're not using, radial arm saws and things like that.
Yeah.
But, give them a hot glue gun, and people are like, oh my gosh, you could get burned. I said, well, yeah, you could. And he did, and he won't anymore. So
the irony is that he lets them get away with things I would have been murdered for.
Yep.
Okay.
True.
Well, that is kind of the
Grandpa.
nature of the beast. The grandchild does get away with things that the kid doesn't. I mean,
Yeah, the
that's been my
snack drawer is
experience.
always fully stocked.
yeah.
So,
Fun fact, artists, if the snacks are for the studio, they are a business expense.
True story. Do you guys remember the Munns? Vicky and Lance Munn from years ago, furniture makers from Indiana. Because Lance made wine shelves, Vicky was adamant about the fact, because she was the business side of their business, that the wine could be a tax write-off deduction because they made wine shelves and they needed the wine to in the booth to show the wine shelf. So
Perfect. You can't have old crusty labels, so you got to get new ones.
That's right.
So you have to dispose of the wine somehow. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Dad, we should start making wine racks.
Yeah, I know. You could make something, Carl, that really cool to pour a shot of whiskey. Maybe that'd be better.
Have you seen that? There is one of those that does a bottle of wine. You pull a lever and it uncorks, pours, and puts back in one go.
Ooh, cool.
Really? A sculpture artist does this? Is this what you're talking about? Or is this just a...
YouTube. I don't know if it was an engineer or an artist, but it was beautifully done in stainless steel and brass.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the different generation. I mean, you guys have acknowledged that you have these similarities about how you think and that sort of thing, but how is it kind of a different flair in the sense of, being at different times in history, different things in our lives that influence our upbringing and that sort of thing?
Well, it's been interesting watching it from when I was a kid because I've only been doing shows now for 12 years, which isn't that long, not compared to Dad, but I still remember, emptying the dining room and taking art off the wall so that we could project slides on the white wall so he could figure out slides for shows and things like that.
Right.
The old process like that. And things I've noticed about as far as time going on is just how the weather and climate change have affected shows more. And I don't know if that's necessarily in my head or it's social media with things like the independent artist podcasts and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. Because as a kid growing up, I remember one show that was a catastrophic storm that just left easy ups like in the wake after everybody was done.
You have a poor memory, Carl.
I just remember that one show in particular. But what I mean, though, is that I remember big storms, but the kind that just destroy tents and booths, I only remember one or two. But now with social media, I see them a lot more.
True.
But I also seems like I'm getting more rain, and more high heat than when I was a kid.
Right. I mean, does this model of doing shows, this has been like kind of your dad's sole way of meeting collectors and having his work go into people's homes. But now with the internet and social media and all that kind of stuff, do you feel like you have other options, Carl, for how you can connect with collectors to sell your work?
No, actually, I don't. Shows, I think, are still kind of the best venue for that. I have, talking to patrons at art shows and things, I explain it in that, an arts festival is kind of like a museum, but everybody's still alive. It's all for sale.
Right.
Whereas a gallery, you get to buy the art, but you don't get to take a piece of the artist home. I mean, when I look at my walls and see the artwork I've purchased at arts festivals or from friends or traded for, I'm bringing a piece of that artist home with me and the story and their personality and talking to them. And I think that's a substantial part of the art experience, whereas you go to a gallery, you're interacting with somebody third person who's explaining what you mean.
Carl and I also are very fortunate in that we don't have much competition for what we do. I mean, there's not someone else on the Art Fair circuit at all that does things with rolling balls or making gears and things like that. So when people need to buy it, they come to us.
I mean, there's kinetic work out there, but it's of a completely different, and it's a handful. It's definitely not like you're competing against 150 or 200 other painters for that one of 12 spots in a show.
Yeah, and we everything we make generally sells at shows. So we haven't needed to follow galleries. I've done a couple of galleries over the years for short periods of time, and it always ends up being more of a headache than anything. Trying to supply a gallery, well, their busy show season was my busy show season, and I couldn't keep them supplied when they needed it. And even if I could, I'd be getting 50% of what I could at the show. So it's like
you're cutting yourself off at the knees at that point.
Yeah.
Well, and this growing up in this business has been really interesting because, Dad started doing functional pottery. It was plates, settings, and coffee mugs. So, I've seen both ends of the spectrum from small local shows up to the A-list shows and production stuff where you're competing against everybody else with a coffee mug. Dad's way of giving him a raise wasn't that he could raise the prices for a coffee mug. It's that he had to make more coffee mugs per hour.
That's a grind that is impossible to feel fulfilled. It's like being on that treadmill that we all complain about.
Yeah.
Well, you even timed it. How long did it take you to make a mug or a bowl? What was it down to? Well, from manufacturing to out of the kiln?
3 minutes for each mug. It came down to it. You just kept finding ways to do it quicker. But like you said, it eventually sucks your soul out. And I wasn't able to throw a different shaped mug, not without a lot of work. And it's one of the reasons that I made the jump. And when I started doing the sculptures, I thought I could go 2 different ways with this. I could make something and get really good at it and make it faster again with these sculptures, or I can make every one of a kind. And I chose the latter just because it wasn't sucking my soul out. It's been a lot more fun.
Plus, and your wife told you to do it that way, remember? I mean, didn't she say, look, you're making all these pieces for fun. There's a market for this. Why don't you get out there and sell it?
Yeah.
He did that with pottery, too, though.
Okay.
There was a time period when I was in junior high, I think it was early junior high, where he was doing raku pottery and everything was one of a kind.
Yeah, I mean, in my short raku life actually went really well. It sold really well, but people would order a piece and
it was fragile
ship
stuff.
it, and it was really fragile, and it'd break, and they'd say, "Okay, I want one just like it," and it's like, can't do that.
That ain't happening.
Yeah, and I finally, I was so tired of shipping things out and sitting with a lump in my stomach until I heard it made it. That I said, I can't do this anymore. So I gave that up.
Jeff, your booth, it's a spectacle. Do you ever run into the challenge that your neighbor at the show looks at you and says, "Oh, I'm next to this guy"?
Yeah, and it's something that I'm trying to be very conscious of. I try and be the best neighbor I can be.
Okay.
I set up my booth so people aren't standing in front of other people's booths.
You try to always ask for a corner if possible. That way you have one neighbor instead of wedging between, two booths.
Yeah, and that way I can direct people into the opening rather than, because it's kind of a madhouse. One time I was at Fort Worth and Chris Dahlquist, photographer, was setting up next to me. And she told me this the next day, that she said she saw me unpacking and going, "Oh my gosh, I'm next to that marble guy." Oh. And she came over to me after the first day and said, "I was really worried about this, but this has been great. You suck up all the children and the stupid people."
Stupid people.
Yeah. And I do. It's just one of the services I provide. She said that weekend was really packed, and her friends who were in other booths were having people knock things over, and that she couldn't talk to people because you get the, "Oh gosh, you make these pictures" kind of people in. And she said, "I got to talk to real customers, and I didn't have any damage because the stupid people and the kids would just see your booth and go over there. And then it would leave me to be really nice."
But as kind of like a side benefit for you, I know that you're really intrigued by people. I mean, you like to study people and their personality quirks they delight you. I mean, you tell plenty of stories about you encounter with people in your booth. I mean, is your work is a good segue for that, people watching.
Oh, it's amazing. And it's one of the reasons I will always do shows. When people see my booth, they think, "Oh my gosh, how can you take this?" And it's a blast if you let it be a blast. I have to sit in my chair at the booth because people can't find me, because I will generally have 10 to 20 people in my booth all the time. So they don't know who the artist is. In fact, I've been working on a sculpture with the pliers, and some guy behind me says, "Are you supposed to be doing that?" Because he just assumed I was some guy in the crowd with a pliers.
Like you're damaging the artist's work or something.
Yeah. But it's I love seeing how people's minds work. And it took me a while in making what I do to actually realize why I do what I do. I'm really interested in systems. And it's not just mechanical systems. It's the systems and how people think and how they act. And my sculptures have a way of disarming people, and the real them come out, and things just fall out of their mouths sometimes, which is, I find absolutely hilarious.
Okay.
Because a lot of times it's not until after they've walked away that I realize what they said. And it's like, what?
Like maybe it might be something that could be taken offensively or taken the wrong way, but they just almost like a kid, they are filterless. It just, whatever they see comes out of their mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is it. And I never really have any negative things that people mean. Every now and then, but that's not my buyer. I don't care. And they've got other problems. If they can't just come to a show and just have fun,
well, I had the pleasure of being Carl's neighbor, Carl at Jazz Fest. We were next to each other. And your collector has, I think, almost a different kind of intent or reaction to your work. It's a little more thought-provoking, would you say?
Dad's is more active, mine's more passive. The one problem I have had is that with his being so active, I have a harder time getting customers over the threshold to open their wallets. Dad's is more active and engaging, so there's more adrenaline, more excitement in the purchasing, where mine, you have to get closer and study the movement and how things are laid out and done. So I have a harder time making sales.
Your work has an intellectual quality to it. I'm thinking like the piece of where it was, and this might have been from a long time ago. This wasn't at the last show, but it was the speed sign that has a cutout and it has gears moving, and then you've got the car and the houses. It's like basically like you're on this treadmill traveling around across country, and you watch the motion and you can really feel the repetitiveness, and it makes you go internal. And then like with Jeff, the ball goes down and you're like, is it going to make the jump? Oh, it made the jump, and it's spinning here and it's down and it's up and and it's doing that. You know what I mean? There's like this element of surprise with what you're doing, Jeff.
Yeah, and that's really in a nutshell of the difference in our work.
Once we did the sculpture show in Loveland, Colorado.
Okay.
And the way the tent was done is, it's a sculpture show, so everybody has pedestals except for Dad and I. We have walls.
Wall sculpture, yeah.
So the way the tent was done is it had 10-foot booths in the middle and 10-foot booths on the aisles, against the walls. So we had to face both directions. So we each got a 10 by 10, and then we split it and made it into a 5 by 20. So he faced one aisle and I faced the other. And there was one 10 by 10 on the end of the row next to us. So they would go down the entire length of the show, see my dad's marble work, go to the booth next to us, around the corner, and see my work. And they thought mine was the backside of his sculpture, making them work all weekend.
It's like looking inside the brain, the inner gears of the brain, how it's working.
And for the life of me, I don't know how they figured I was going to get in their walls and put Carl's thing inside the wall to make my sculptures work.
Or the fact that the wall was a 1 pro panel thick. Because we had a whole storeroom in there.
Yeah, those are the kind of goofy things we run into all the time.
Yeah, but do you? I mean, other than that, do you have any other experiences? Maybe like people will confuse, they'd see the last name, they see kinetic sculpture, but then they expect
all the time
it to be one or the other.
Yeah. That happens all the time. I get people who come to my booth and say, oh, I saw your work last year. Well, I wasn't there last year. Or, oh, your work's changed. Or I get a lot of people looking at a business card and looking at my sign and looking at a business card and looking at my sign, like all kinds of that stuff. We find that we can't be next to each other at a show because they think we're the same artist. We have to have distance as the patrons go. So like Fort Worth, we can be back to back, but we can't be next to each other. They have to be able to go down one block and up the other, or around the corner or something.
Just enough space so they can forget.
I get a lot of, I was just down at your brother's booth. I'm like, well, thanks for that. Although at Jazz Fest, one person did come up and say, I was just at your grandson's booth. It's like, ouch.
I'm never going to let you forget that one.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how, you guys find yourself having a lot of things in common. What are some of the major differences between father and son that, that are quite different in your personality?
Well, I'm better looking.
Ooh. Ow. Of
course, there you go.
You notice I didn't even argue the point?
No, he was like, I'll give it to him.
You got it. I don't care. It doesn't really matter to me anymore.
It never mattered to you.
You passed a certain point and you're like, who cares?
Yeah.
I've heard the expression, beauty fades, but stupid is forever. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying in your case, Carl, that there's no stupidity there, but
no, it fits.
I think one of the ways that our artwork does differ is mine is more intuitive. Each piece is individual, and I just build it. It would actually be harder to duplicate them. And his are much more thought out. Each part has to be figured out with gear ratios, clearances.
It's harder to build it organically.
Yeah.
That's one thing Renee and I were talking about this after the show, Carl. We spent a long weekend with you and admiring your work. And my first impression was that your pieces were organic, that the gears were found objects that you pieced together. And Renee said to me, no, those are all designed, and he laser cuts them and different sizes and this and that. So talk on that, the amount of planning and the construction that goes into your pieces.
Well, I got my first truck at 16, and that was about the time that Dad started incorporating some of the found metal colored panels into his art and stuff. So we frequented the scrapyard, and I started bringing stuff home, pulleys and gears and things like that. And I'll be honest, he yelled at me for bringing a lot of stuff home, but he never yelled at me for bringing those things home. And they line his retaining wall in the garden outside our old studio by his house.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the influence for the patterns and things like that, and the steam shows I go to. And the problem is that anything I find, it's going to be 2 inches of cast iron. It's going to be really heavy. And something coming out of a transmission of a combine isn't going to work with something out of a printing press. They all have different teeth and different sizes. And they're, as far as I'm concerned, one of a kind. A 1920 printing press that's being scrapped at our scrapyard, I'm never going to see that part again. And to get into something like a tractor or a combine, that's a lot of work to pull apart transmissions and differentials and, big, rusty, heavy stuff. So with my master's degree in historical archaeology, I knew my way around archives and libraries in digital documents. So I followed the train of thought and manufacturing backwards. So a company that has a gear or a pulley or something with a design, they're getting it from a machinist who is getting it from a foundry, who gets it from a pattern maker, who gets it from a draftsman. So I followed the train back until I found all the old drafting manuals for how this equipment was drawn. And that's how I learned to do the teeth shapes, and I learned how to do the spoke patterns, and all the spokes are shaped for different reasons. In the old times, it took better foundries to make straight spokes than curved spokes, and some were decorative because they were on things that were seen, like coffee grinders at general stores and that kind of stuff. So I had to start making them.
But then you could adjust the scale, so you can go off the design of what was actual and real and model it after that, but then adjust the scale to what you want it to be in your pieces.
Exactly. By making them myself, I'm able to do the size. I can do the spoke pattern. I can do the number of spokes. I can scale it up or down. I can flip patterns left and right. I'm not solely limited by what I have. It takes a fair amount of time to lay out a new gear design or pattern, but then it's like having a photograph negative. I can make another copy. And early on, my sculptures, all the gears were one piece. It was a layer. And then I realized that if I stacked 2 layers, I could mimic the relief that they saw in the casting process. So everybody thinks that they're all old. And it's actually one of the things I fight, is because I think a lot of people just write off that I'm just throwing old things together.
Right. Like it's kind of accidental or random, that
it's a collage.
There is a lot of design and planning involved in executing up the work.
Yeah. And when I first started, I was using a lot of found metal in my backgrounds like Dad does. And my first year or two out, like, they looked a lot like his as far as the structure and the shapes and the colors in the backgrounds with his backgrounds. And I kept getting more solid, and it was harder to get bigger pieces. And I had a couple pieces that kind of came out like a patchwork quilt with all these colors, riveted and fastened together. And it was really chaotic. And so I had been toying around with another idea of adding vintage graphics. So that's when I started doing my new work. That's the newer style that has the graphics and the patinas and things like that. And finding the graphics to go with the sculpture is actually the hardest part for me, because I can't just throw in any old picture or any old drawing. It has to be something that ties into the piece.
Something you said back a little bit there that sparked something in me is, how did you develop both your personality and your direction as an artist out from under this big presence of your father?
Yeah. It's something I still actually struggle with. I mean, the way I came up with my art is I was accepted to a PhD program, and the downturn of '08 had happened, and I didn't want to go take on 7 more years of debt to not know what was going to happen or what I would have for an academic job and things like that. And so I chose to go into the family business of being an artist. When I switched from art to anthropology and archaeology, it was actually my dad who, I couldn't decide between the two. I loved both of them. And he said, do the archaeology. You can always do the art. So he was right, and I came back to that, but I didn't know what my body of work would look like. I chose not to go into the rolling ball stuff because I didn't want to split the kitty, if you will. That was his thing.
Yeah.
But just to see, like, well, what's me? And just a side comment, he's like, you can make art out of gears. And it was like, bam, that was it. So I still struggle with that. I still think that, like, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have a clue what my artwork would be.
Well, I think about being a dad to kids and being an artist. One of the things I've always wanted to give them is the space to be creative, the space to be who they are. As artists, we are such a unique group that we're not so rigid about societal norms or like what is expected of people. And so I felt like that was something I had an intention on my kids. Did you feel like that you got that also from your dad, that he gave you the space to be creative, the space to be yourself?
I always had room to be creative. I mean, I never thought about being creative. It just happened. I drew.
Yeah.
I just did this. I just thought about that. It was nice not to have any of those kind of limits. But with that, it's also, how do you express that?
How do you hone it? How do you focus it?
And
that sort of thing.
That's something I still struggle with, is I still try figuring out, like, what direction to take things. When my early work looked a lot like his in some of the compositions and colors, it's because we liked the same shapes. We liked the same colors. It wasn't until, my work was changing into what you see now that I was able to look back and go, oh, I definitely see those influences.
And Jeff, how about you from that other vantage point of, watching your son step into this field, step into this role, and now you kind of have this pure relationship. Talk about that whole experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to watch over the years. Like Carl started out like when he was just a little kid. Our pottery that we had was in the basement of our house. So it was just really remarkable.
Made castles and dragons and
it was really remarkable having a studio in the house, and then he could just go downstairs and make something out of clay, and he did. The downside is most parents have a little portfolio of pictures their kid took. We've got boxes of stuff our kids made because it's 3-dimensional.
Right.
But as a adult and having your son working in it, being an art fair artist has amazing advantages. It really does.
Yeah.
It does have down times and tough times because it's just the nature of the business.
Unpredictability and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And you never know if that next show is going to be fabulous or it's going to be rained out. We were both of us were just at Reston a couple of weeks ago, and it was awful. The show was awful for everybody that I talked to. And it was mainly because of the debt ceiling was coming up, and nobody knew where that was going to go. And artists are held hostage to that stuff, and you don't always know ahead of time what's going to happen.
We're kind of the front lines in that regard.
Right. What I always thought is, people have to be feeling good to buy art.
Yeah.
And if they're nervous, they're not going to buy art.
So, Jeff, when you encouraged him to pursue the anthropology, when he was kind of like, should I do art? Should I do anthropology? Was part of you kind of feeling like, well, I'd be really a proud dad if he followed in my footsteps, but maybe I should push him to the other love to see if he comes back to it, if that's really where he naturally gravitates?
Well, I think, I didn't even think about it that way. I thought it more about him finding his way, period. Archaeology was him. Oh my gosh, doing digs and examining artifacts, and it still happens all the time with him, even unofficially. I mean, he's always looking at the ground, and if there's a square nail someplace, he's got it, and it's in a box at home now.
It's like he found a treasure or something.
Yeah, because they're artifacts of some kind. And unfortunately, it doesn't pay very well. And after he had his master's and he had accepted the PhD program, he just really looked at it analytically, which I was quite proud of him to do, and say, this is 7 more years, and if I get out, if I can even find a job, it's not going to pay anything. So that's when he said, "Well, I'm going to try the art thing for a while. I can always go back to the PhD thing." So it was nice that he could do that.
I think that is one of the biggest gifts that being an artist has done for me, is that feeling of we can evolve, we can change courses. We have what's in here up in our brains, the ability to adapt and to create. And that's the skill, not necessarily the what are we going to sell, but the, how are we going to navigate through this crazy life?
Right. And a big part for me was that, I started as a mechanical engineering student. I went on to become an art student where I got a minor, and I went into archaeology. And for a while I was like, well, what connects all those things? It seems really random. And I realized it was creative problem solving and out of the box thinking. That as an engineer, you're given a problem and you have to figure out how to solve it. As an artist, you have an idea and you have to figure out how to create it and bring it into this world. And as an archaeologist, you're given pieces of a puzzle and not even a whole picture. And you have to say, what does this mean? And you have to put together the puzzle. And I see, all three of those really mesh in my artwork and influence all of that, the engineering, the history, and the anthropology. My artwork is filled with artifacts, whether it's badges off of old motors or the bits and bobs of vintage hardware I squirrel away because the old stuff looks different than anything I can buy now.
And as the archaeologist, I have to say it's really hard for him to put those in the artwork so it goes away. Someone else buys it. It's like,
those are the things he wants to hold on to.
They have to be worthy.
It has to be really worthy for the piece, for that old motor badge to go in there because it hurts.
Well, hopefully a few extra zeros go onto the piece to make it a little easier to ease the pain.
Yeah, my dad and I have this thing where I'm a bit of a saver and a hoarder, whereas that's how he started in his artwork back, when we were doing this, 30 years ago. But he has honed his craft to know what he needs and what he has. So he's getting rid of all this extra stuff that he doesn't need. And I'm kind of like, no, I might need that still. The case in point is like all of the switches on my artwork, they're all Korean War surplus. We found a surplus store in Colorado, and they had an entire bin. The guy's father or grandfather had started it. The original contents came from surplus auctions from the military. So this entire bin was full of like Vietnam, Korean War surplus toggle switches. And I bought all of them. I just plunked the whole bin down and said, how much for all of them?
You would sound like a big roller walking in.
Well, when they were marked 50 cents a piece, and I buy all like 400 of them or 1,000 or whatever it was.
Because you'll never find them again.
Yeah. But the weird thing is that about 2 weeks before this happened, my father decided that, he had this bin of the labels for toggle switches that say on, off. That he had found at a surplus store probably when I was in elementary school, maybe junior high, and he had never used one ever in a sculpture. So he dumped them out into the recycling, and I went through and says, no, we can't get rid of these. And I picked every last one out to then 2 weeks later get an entire bin of switches that need those but don't have them. So all of the on-off switches on my sculptures are from that surplus scrap and the things my dad tried throwing away.
It's the synchronicity of the puzzle pieces all coming together at different times. It's like the Holy Grail or something that, Jeff, you had the power all along, waiting for Carl to have them.
But it also has developed into kind of this game where he'll come to me and be like, do we still have XYZ? And I'll be, you mean XYZ, the thing you tried throwing away 6 months ago that I went and hid over in that corner when you weren't looking? It's over there behind that stuff.
And he never lets me forget.
It's a balancing act. He's in the getting rid of phase of his life, and I'm still in the I don't know what I need yet phase, so hold on to everything.
Absolutely. You
so
never know. It's going to come in handy someday.
It does balance well.
Yeah. Okay, so, before we wrap up this talk, anybody who knows you knows that you guys have got the best stories from the road. So, Jeff, can you start off and tell us some of your favorite stories?
I've had a number of really amazing people I've met and experiences. early on in my career, I sold a rather large piece, probably 5 feet square, to a guy. So can you bring it to my office? And
he invented the Happy Meal.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, he's the guy who invented the Happy Meal, by the way. It was kind of, yeah.
That wasn't Ronald McDonald who did that?
No, it was not.
No, it was his advertising company.
Yeah. So I brought it up to his office where he was going to put it.
Okay.
And he's looking around, and the office was just filled with really expensive art.
Oh.
And he's talking to his secretary, where are we going to put it? He said, well, we could take the Warhol down. So I actually got to take down a 4-foot wide Andy Warhol and hang my sculpture there instead.
That's when you know you've arrived, right?
Yeah. Luckily, my wife was there at the time to see it because she wouldn't believe it. Yeah.
She'd be like, yeah, right, Jeff, you're making up stories again.
Yeah. Another time, well, this happened last fall. Carl and I were at Plaza, and this guy who liked both of our work bought one of my pieces, and
we had to install it,
Had to install it because it was a large piece. So we brought it to his house, had to go in through his garage to get his house, and there was a 56 pink T-Bird in his garage and kind of a car elevator thing.
Okay.
And Carl mentioned that car. Oh, that's a nice car. And the guy said, that used to be Marilyn Monroe's car. It's like,
you're kidding.
What? Really? He said, can we get a picture of it?
So he backs it out and we take pictures with it. And then he hands me the keys.
Really?
He says,
take it for a spin?
You guys want to take it for a drive? So we got to drive Marilyn Monroe's car.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. The one that sticks out for me is right when my work changed from the very colorful stuff that was more reminiscent of my dad's work to the style I have now. Just as I had transitioned, we did a tour for a group.
Yeah.
One of those service groups, Rotary and Lions and those kind of groups. And I had just finished this piece. I had only made a few in this style. It was the first one of this model. So the tour went through. It was at like 7 a.m. It was the sunrise group before, everybody had to be at work. And the one guy, he showed up about 5 minutes late after everybody else had been starting on the tour.
Okay.
And everybody left. And he just said, I'd like to buy that piece. And Dad and I were just shocked because we don't ever expect anybody to buy our stuff locally.
Okay.
We know we have an expensive price point. And he came back the next week to pay for it. And he has this envelope. And he says, well, I was thinking this is kind of an old-timey artwork, so I'd pay you in an old-timey way. And he starts unwrapping this envelope, and I'm like, is this cash? Like I've seen cash.
Cash is old-timey. It's not that old-timey, but...
Yeah, and what he had was 4 1-ounce gold coins.
Okay.
That were within the spot price at gold at that time was within about $50 of the price of the sculpture.
Okay.
So he in front of my father, he paid for his sculpture with these 4 1-ounce South African cougarons.
And did you bite the coin to see if it was authentic? How did you know he wasn't pulling you a line or something?
I should have. But it was just amazing to hold these 4 coins in my hand that were so heavy, and they they were worth more than my truck.
Yeah.
It was just so surreal. That next spring, I made a sign for my booth that was Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Cougarons. I ended up cashing them in because I was just like, if this was a credit card slip, my bills would be paid. So I ended up doing all that. But the story is just amazing. I don't know,
Yeah.
I remember as soon as he left, Dad just looked at me and went, nobody's ever paid me in gold.
Yeah, right. It's like that MasterCard commercial from years ago where they say, the experience priceless or whatever.
Priceless.
Remember when they would talk about priceless? It's like getting the gold coins was priceless.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
So you mentioned that that local tour. Don't you guys have something coming up here, some project from Fergus Falls that you wanted to talk about?
Dad and I just found out that we each got one of the 2 major projects for our local City of Fergus Falls riverfront development.
Really? Is it a collaboration or 2 separate projects?
We each pitched an idea for one of the 2 locations. I took one location, he took the other. The funding is all done through the McKnight Foundation and other things.
Nope. The funding is all done through the National Institute, NEA, and then a local, the Dell Trust matched it. So it was a nice size sculptures, 2 big ones.
And it has to be local Minnesota artists. So
awesome.
Mine's going to be about like 20 feet tall, kinetic with butterflies spinning on stained glass that with the trails spinning. And then dads are going to be life-size bison that the wind make rock back and forth like they're running.
Did you have to present a design that they chose, or did they choose you and then you were able to design what you wanted?
It was a request for qualifications, but it was worded like it was a request for proposals as well. So we kind of mashed them in together.
Okay. So you did present them with what your idea would be, and they were selecting based on what you were going to design for them.
Right. We did some small maquettes, working maquettes, because in order to pitch something like this, we had to make sure it worked, since it was actually a moving piece. So we did some small maquettes, and that way we were able to video it and show them what it would look like, and I think that helped.
What is Fergus Falls like, actually? I've been wondering. I hear a lot about Fergus Falls. I know there's a number of artists up that way. Is it a real small community? Is it progressive?
It's about just over 14,000 people.
Okay.
But what makes it really amazing is it has a legacy of the arts that date back to a local artist named Charlie Beck. They're celebrating the anniversary of his 100th birthday this year. And he was a local sign painter that did carving and woodblock prints and everything, and is fairly well represented in the Midwest in museums and galleries and things like that.
Okay.
And he taught at the community college and really instilled his passion for art in a lot of locals. So we have some amazing painters, and the art has just kind of been growing around that over and over and over. So now we have the Lake Region Arts Council, which does gallery shows and grant funding for people in this part of the state. And we have a branch of Springboard for the Arts, which is a nonprofit out of St. Paul that brings in residency and does funding and helps with that kind of stuff. We have the Cadets Gallery. We have a playhouse. So there's a lot of art, and it just keeps getting condensed here. I'd say we probably have one of the better art scenes outside of Minneapolis and Duluth in the state.
I mean, that community is so small to have such a huge arts representation and focus.
Yeah. And they've done funding to find out how much money the arts contribute to the state and to the region, both through organizations like the theaters and the galleries, and also the private artists. It was about a 2-year study. And even prior to those studies, I had found that I had heard a study come out, must have been probably about 8 years ago, that Minnesota is the second best state in the country to be an artist in after New York.
Interesting.
And there's also things like the McKnight Foundation, and Minnesota also has the Legacy Amendment and Percent for the Arts. So like any state or federal project in the state of Minnesota, a certain percentage of the budget has to go to the arts. So there is artwork at rest stops and all kinds of things like that.
Jeff, is this stuff that you've known about over the years, or is Carl like bringing this information to you? You know what I mean? Is this something he finds out?
No, it wasn't always that way in Fergus. I mean, a lot of it had to do with Charlie Beck, of course, or Charles Beck, I guess. Anyway, I knew him, and we talked, and we were friends. I was at a show in Kansas City, and someone asked, "Oh my gosh, you're from Fergus Falls, isn't that where Charles Beck is from? Do you know Charles?" I said, "Charlie? Yeah, I know Charlie." "Oh my gosh, you call him Charlie?" It's just like, yeah. But anyway, a lot of arts have spun off due to him, and also some other people who moved to Fergus probably
30 years ago,
kind of thing. And it's just it's a beautiful county.
Nice.
Minnesota has over 10,000 lakes.
About over 11,000 lakes.
And
Otter Tail County has 1,053.
Oh.
We have more lakes in our county than any other county in the continuous 48 states. And the whole western fifth of our county has 0 lakes because of the glaciers.
Okay, so Minnesota was always called the land of 10,000 lakes. How did they get an extra 1,000? When did that come up?
Because they never counted very well.
Okay.
It was just rough. Somebody counted, and the exact number just doesn't roll off the tongue very well, and it was already on the license plate.
And that was back in the analog days where someone had to drive around and count a lake. Did we count that one? Oh, I think so. Don't count that one again.
Actually, that was 1,000 extra lakes you missed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why Will is out on the lake right now, probably.
Either that or he's sweating his pants off trying to get one more painting ready to go to Old Town. So,
oh, that's right.
Oh,
You guys
they're
have
Old
that next
Town.
we
weekend.
got
Yeah.
Old Town.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
That's such a great neighborhood.
You guys are amazing. This has been a great talk, and I really enjoy finding out the nuances, the differences between the two of you, but then also kind of the similarities. And it's just been a really great conversation.
Well, thank
for
you.
Me. So thanks.
It's been fun.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you in Cherry Creek. I got the call, and I'm off the wait list.
Awesome.
Congrats. We'll see you there.
Yeah.
So see you there, guys.
Hope you're my
Okay.
neighbor again.
Yes, hopefully. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
See you there.
Good luck in Old Town.
You too. Bye-bye.
Great talk with the Zachmanns there, Douglas. Really interesting to hear the dichotomy between that father and son. And man, in a couple of weeks, we've got another talk that you and I are just going to sit down and hammer out together. And Douglas and I are going to be answering some questions as far as from some emerging artists and
Awesome. Yeah.
get into some other things as well next time. So if you have questions you want to ask, if you are kind of coming up or an old hand and you have something, jump on our Facebook page and ask a question or see something you want us to address. And if it's appropriate, we'll give it a shot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great. You could do private messages, or you could do email, or just write as a post on our Facebook page. So feel free to send us your comments or some questions that you'd like us to address.
Hey, folks, if you have any interest in T-shirts or stickers or anything like that, we are toying around with the idea of merch for the show to kind of keep the expenses down that we have addressed. Zap has been kind enough to sponsor us, and we definitely use every penny of that to keep this program going. But if you guys have any interest in that, we're kind of kicking tires on that. So let us know on Facebook or what have you, and we'll talk again soon.
Definitely. All right. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, find us on social media and engage in these conversations.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.
Oh, and if you like the show, we'd love it if you would give us your 5-star rating and offer up your most creative review on your podcast streaming service. See you next time.